The monotonous hum of the recycler filled the bay, a dull rhythm of industry that had long ago blended into the background for Marcus Drake. Grease stained his worn jumpsuit. The bitter tang of old engine oil was a constant in the dank air, and somewhere beneath the grime, his skin prickled with cold sweat. This wasn't a regular job. "You ever wonder, Cap?" His comms crackled with Johnson's voice. "What all this scrap was once?" Marcus crouched in the skeletal remains of a Zylon scout ship, the scavenged hulk a twisted mess of warped metal and sheared circuitry. "History, Johnson. Mostly bad history." "Yeah," Johnson sighed, a huff of static over the line. "Just, sometimes it hits you. This was someone's ride before we turned it into coasters." Marcus grunted in reluctant agreement. The Z-Wars were 2 centuries past, a brutal flashpoint when the technologically superior Zylons had blitzed their way through human colonies, confident in their victory. Humanity had paid dearly but ultimately triumphed. The Zylon Empire shattered. Marcus was born to peace, but the cold echoes of that war lingered. "Cap, you got something back here? Doesn't match the schematics." Johnson's voice held a note of unease. Marcus pried open the jammed access panel with a wrench. Inside wasn't a power core or control system, but a cell. Filthy, cramped, and rigged with crude shock notes. "Enslavement pods," Marcus snarled, his heart hammering. Old tales of human POWs crammed into Zylon warships for labor or twisted experimentation came back with sickening clarity. "Boss, this ship," Johnson choked. "It wasn't military. It's barely got teeth." A glance at a cracked viewport confirmed it. The asteroid belt wasn't just littered with warships. Derelict haulers and colony ships, all gutted and rewired, floated like grotesque parodies of their former roles. "They're not raiders anymore," Marcus spoke, his voice hoarse. "Slavers." Word spread through the salvage ship like wildfire, stoking a rage that had been banked for generations. This wasn't a war, it was a genocide. It was a stain upon the very idea of peace they'd earned through blood. Marcus didn't give orders, he didn't need to. Every crewman had ancestors with stories whispered at bedsides, the disappeared, the camps, the desperate last stands. Their vessel, the Ironclad, a rust bucket hauler with more patches than original hull, turned on a dime. Comm systems they'd scavenged were hastily retuned to blast wide-band distress calls and warnings, their course set for the nearest human outpost. The journey through the asteroid belt was a waking nightmare. Each derelict ship painted a chilling picture. Cargo holds had become cells, medical bays transformed into torture chambers. The Zylons, once a star-spanning empire, were reduced to ghoulish scavengers, twisting their stolen technology for the most abhorrent purpose. By the time the Ironclad limped into the outer perimeter of Station Liberty, the crew was buzzing with a grim, focused fury. Their frantic hail was met with confusion and then disbelief, the echoes of war too distant for the civilian hub. Marcus sent them the evidence, the images of the pods, the spectral remains of the ships. Outrage rippled through the station, turning to cold determination in the eyes of the fleet liaison. "Your ship isn't fit for combat," the Admiral, a scarred veteran named Thorne, said gruffly. "We don't have time to mobilize, but we'll arm you to the teeth with what we have." The Ironclad was reborn in a whirlwind of activity that left Greece and weariness forgotten. Missile pods were cobbled onto external hardpoints. Old railguns meant for mining duty were resurrected. Johnson, a whiz with anything electronic, gleefully tore into the ship's sensor suite, jury-rigging long-range scanners and overclocking their ancient targeting systems. "We're gonna be their worst nightmare, Cap," he grinned, the dim light of the work bay painting his face with an almost manic glow. They weren't a warship, but they were a thunderbolt of retribution forged in desperation and righteous anger. Every man on board had been a scrapper, a mechanic, a salvager. Now, within the course of a day, they were gunners, tacticians, and warriors, united by the echoes of the past whispering of the price of complacency. Admiral Thorne handed Marcus a data chip. "Zylon chatter we picked up. We believe they're consolidating their fleet, if you can call it that, for a run on a small mining colony. We can't get there in time." Marcus gripped the chip, a silent oath hardening in his chest. We will. The ironclad tore from Liberty's docks, a patched-together predator bursting into the star-speckled void. Old navigation charts gleaned from 100 scraps showed a potential shortcut through a volatile stretch of nebulae. The risk was immense, but it might buy them precious hours. The nebula was an inferno in slow motion, churning clouds of electrified gas and crackling radiation. Lightning licked the hull, and Johnson screamed updates through the comm as the sensors went haywire. They flew blind for excruciating moments, Marcus weaving the lumbering ship through the celestial storm based on instinct and a prayer. When the ironclad spat free of the nebula, the stars ahead seemed to ripple and distort. For a terrifying moment, Marcus braced for an ambush, for the void to vomit forth a swarm of Zylon fighters. But it wasn't an ambush. It was an armada. Dozens, maybe hundreds of grotesque hybrid ships drifted silently, their cobbled-together engines cold. The mining colony floated nearby, intact, but its defensive grid was inactive, its comms ominously silent. The Zylons were so confident in their numbers, in the fear they thought they commanded, they hadn't bothered with sentries. "Cap, this is too many," Johnson muttered, the tremble in his voice mirroring the tremor in Marcus's own hands. The ironclad roared to life, its aged engines roaring more in defiance than power. Missiles streaked away, targeting the largest Zylon clusters. In retaliation, the enemy's cobbled-together armada jerked into chaotic motion, energy weapons spitting angrily, their accuracy hampered by the surprise of the attack. "Evasive maneuvers, Cap!" Johnson screamed into the comm as targeting locks blinked red on their own battered hull. Marcus threw the ironclad into a wild roll, the G-forces squeezing the breath from his lungs. He hammered the firing sequence, missiles, railguns, anything to keep the swarm off balance. Wreckage bloomed in the void as their makeshift weaponry found its mark. Zylon ships, never built for this kind of intense brawl, disintegrated under the focused fire. But for every enemy that fell, another took aim. The ironclad shuddered under punishing strikes, old armor buckling and groaning. Warning sirens shrieked, atmospheric scrubbers sputtering as smoke choked the air. "We're gonna make it, right, Cap?" "We've got a job to do," Marcus bit out, his knuckles white on the control yoke. Ahead was the largest of them, a twisted hulk that had once been a human freighter, its guts now bristling with stolen weapons. The command ship, their best guess. Marcus aimed the ironclad on a collision course, the nose of their ship glowing cherry red under the strain. This was madness, a desperate gamble born of the knowledge that there was no retreat, no reinforcements waiting in the wings. It was the ironclad, beaten, battered, and its crew of survivors against a foe that had underestimated their fury. "Brace for impact!" Marcus roared over the blaring alarms. Johnson's response was a strangled shout, lost in the roar as the ironclad slammed into the Zylon command ship. Metal screamed and tore, the inertial shock throwing Marcus against the console. His vision blurred, then swam in nauseating swirls of red as the emergency lights flickered on. Through the cracked viewport, the monstrous Zylon ship was starting to buckle, the impact having compromised its haphazard structural integrity. Then came the secondary detonations, the ship's magazine overloading, a cataclysmic chain reaction rippling through the heart of their ragged fleet. Coughing blood, Marcus fumbled for the comm unit. "Johnson! Anyone?" Static crackled in response, then a weak voice cut through. "Yeah, Cap. She ain't pretty, but she's flying." Johnson choked, and an undercurrent of hysteria bubbled in his next words. "We did it! We bloody well did it!" One by one, the other voices chimed in, groans of pain mixed with breathless laughter and triumphant, if pained, whoops. The ironclad was a wreck, barely holding together by spit and prayers, but she was alive, and all around them the remnants of the Zylon slave fleet burned or drifted lifelessly. Hours, Marcus wasn't even sure how long, later, it was fleet reinforcements that limped towards them. The rescue crew gaped at the scene of the carnage, then at the battered survivors that crawled from their ruined ship. Admiral Thorne himself boarded, his eyes wide with a strange mix of horror and pride. "Captain Drake?" And the formality held weight Marcus hadn't realized he was craving. "You saved a colony today. More than a colony. You reminded us of what it means to be human." The news spread like wildfire. The name Ironclad was seared into ballads and memorials, but for Marcus and his crew, it was something more. It was the proof that they hadn't just survived a war, they'd carried its lessons with them. In their scars and their stubborn will, they held the echoes of defiance, a warning whispered through the vast emptiness to any who might once again threaten humanity. The Zylons were a dwindling shadow, but they'd proven that old hatreds don't fade easily, that peace couldn't be won and then forgotten. Marcus Drake and his crew of scrappers turned heroes would always be there, scavengers in the dark, their rust-eaten ship a specter, a testament to humanity's unbreakable strength. The Ironclad, somehow, was salvaged and painstakingly patched back together. Marcus, despite offers of command on pristine warships, refused to leave her. The rust and welds weren't just part of the ship now, they were a part of him. The Ironclad was a floating contradiction, a ramshackle relic armed to the teeth that prowled the frontier. Officially on deep salvage runs, unofficially keeping watch with the silent approval of the fleet. The crew, bonded by fire and fury, became legends whispered amongst the spacers and outlaws that called the fringes of civilized space home. They were heroes, but uncomfortable ones. Marcus, haunted by the horrors they unearthed, turned restless, the familiar rhythm of repairs and hauling no longer enough. He saw a galaxy teeming with echoes of vulnerability, the scars of past wars fading, but not gone. One grimy, neon-soaked spaceport gave him an idea. It was the battered form of a mining mech, the kind used on the frontiers, jury-rigged with weapon pods and scavenged armor. It squatted in a dingy repair bay, unwanted but with potential smoldering in its mismatched parts. "You got that look again, Cap," Johnson said, wiping grime from a datapad with dubious efficiency. "That look like you're about to drag us into something righteous and stupid." "Something like that," Marcus admitted, tracing a finger along the pitted armor of the mech. "Look around, Johnson. There's colonies without enough defenses, prospectors jumping blind into uncharted space. They need guardians, but the fleet stretched thin." His gaze swept the sprawling station, the mix of fear and defiance in his eyes of those who scraped a living beyond the boundaries. They need more than warnings. They need the ironclad spirit. The mechanic, a wily old woman named Esme, who'd seen more forgotten wars than fleet admirals, cackled. "He's gonna make scrappers into saviors, ain't he?" Johnson grinned, that manic spark back in his eyes. "Sounds about right." The training was brutal, an echo of their own desperate measures in the face of the Zylon slavers. But these weren't battle-hardened fleet veterans, they were miners, asteroid haulers, people who knew hardship and knew how to make something from nothing. When Marcus showed them the echoes of the slave pods, the same quiet fury that had ignited in his own crew sparked in their eyes. The first Ironclad-class mech lurched off the assembly line, ugly and glorious. Then came another and another. They weren't just machines, but symbols of defiance, a warning howl directed outwards into the void, a promise of retribution to those who dared prey on the fragile outposts of human expansion. Word of this unorthodox defense force spread organically. Mining operations pooled their meager resources for mechs, pilots lining up for the grueling training, knowing they might be the only thing between their families and the shadows. The Ironclads became a badge of honor, a testament to the indomitable human spirit. Marcus, once a simple salvage captain, found himself at strategy tables of fleet command, arguing for information sharing, for placing the misfit mech squadrons where they'd have the most impact. He saw the hesitation in the eyes of old admirals, the reluctance to trust their line of defense to cobble together mechs piloted by miners and engineers. Their first true test came near an asteroid belt notorious for hit-and-run pirate raids. It was an ambush, the pirate vessels spitting fire before the slow-moving mining freighters could power up their shields. And then the ironclads came roaring out of the asteroid field. Not sleek warships, but a swarm of enraged hornets with retrofitted plasma cannons and a score to settle. The pirates weren't used to resistance this fierce, this stubborn. Their formation broke in the face of the ironclad's relentless assault, giving the vulnerable mining ships space to escape. The pirate flagship went down in a blaze of defiance, but the rest scattered. They'd learned a brutal lesson. The frontier wasn't soft pickings anymore. News of the victory echoed back to the core systems, turning the scrappy mech squadron into a symbol of resilience. The fleet brass grudgingly began to see the strategic value in these unorthodox defenders scattered across the vast frontier. The ironclads were a stopgap, but a damn good one. Marcus never forgot his roots. The ironclad, his trusty old hauler, kept its place within his growing sentinel network. It was creaky, its scars never fully healed, but it was home. And on nights when the void seemed especially vast and the echoes of past wars whispered a little too loudly, he'd fire up the ancient engines and patrol the fringes, a lone sentinel against the darkness, a testament to the fact they weren't just survivors, but protectors now. The Zylons faded into a bitter memory, a constant reminder pushing humanity to vigilance. But there were other shadows, other hungers lurking in the vastness of space, and guarding against that darkness stood the ironclads, born of desperation and defiance, forged in the spirit of a species that always stubbornly fought back. The ironclads were a beacon, and like all beacons, they attracted attention. It wasn't the Zylons this time, or even pirates, but something altogether more insidious. A slick corporate delegation arrived on the ironclad with offers that smelled of backroom deals and moral compromises. They represented a colossal megacorp, one of those entities that blurred the line between business and government. Their spokesperson, a man with flawless tailoring and a shark smile, was all smoothness and promises. "The ironclad network is impressive, Captain Drake," he purred. "The board admires your initiative. Imagine what you could achieve with real resources." Marcus leaned back in his threadbare command chair, letting the silence stretch. The ironclad was barely spaceworthy. He patched holes with prayers and haggled over parts with anyone desperate enough to meet with him out on the fringe. What they lacked in resources, they made up for in desperate determination and a network fueled by shared values. "I hear you loud and clear, Mr. He let the question hang. Forgive me. Simmons. William Simmons." The smile widened a fraction, taking on a predatory gleam. "We believe the ironclad model has potential. Defense contracts, official production chains. You could be protecting not just miners, but whole sectors. And all we have to do is put your logo on our mechs." Johnson spat the words, disgust thick in his voice. Simmons tilted his head, acknowledging the hostility. "Branding is a small price to pay for security, for order." That last word was weighted, a subtle threat that echoed down the long corridor of human history. Marcus knew exactly what order looked like with corporate interests at the helm. Monopoly, exploitation dressed up as efficiency, the slow creep of control that echoed the desperation of the Zylon slavers, even if the methods were different. "We appreciate the offer, Mr. Simmons. We'll think on it," Marcus said evenly, a dismissive tone that stood in stark contrast to the man's polished presentation. He felt, rather than saw, the way the smile faltered, curled around the edges. "Of course, you see, Captain, we believe in security too." The words were silken, masking the unspoken threat. "But there are always those who prefer chaos. If something unfortunate happened out there..." Marcus rose, every inch of his body a hard line of defiance. The echoes of his ancestors, the ones sold as commodities by the Zylons, roared to life in his blood. He saw the ghost of those slave pods superimposed over the polished corporate exterior. "If we can survive the Zylons, then we can handle your boardroom." Simmons left with a practiced air of amused patience, but on the bridge of the ironclad a new kind of chill settled. They had proven themselves against a blunt, monstrous force, but this new enemy wore a civilized mask, twisting words into weapons. War, it seemed, never truly ended. It merely shifted, changed forms, but the echoes of humanity's fighting spirit were constant, a timeless pulse against the darkness. Word of the corporate threat rippled through the ironclad network as quickly as any Zylon sighting. It was a different kind of fear, a cold knot in the gut that whispered of insidious compromise and control masquerading as assistance. The miners and haulers who had rallied to the ironclad banner weren't warriors, but their settlements were more than mines and trade hubs. They were homes, hard-won bits of civilization carved against the uncaring expanse. The response came back clear, transmitted on the repurposed frequencies they used to coordinate mech patrols. We hold our own. No suits on our mechs. Crude messages scrawled on banners hung in dusty spaceports added to the defiance. Stubbornness was in their blood now, part of the shared legacy with the ironclad crew, a refusal echoed by those who knew freedom couldn't be bought at any price. Simmons, of course, didn't disappear. His corporation had reach that stretched from boardrooms to back alleys, its fingers in everything from ship manufacturing to mining rights. Shipments were mysteriously delayed, permits revoked, accidents happened with alarming frequency. It was a war of attrition meant to wear them down, to make the promise of corporate backing seem appealing, even necessary. Marcus dug in his heels. The ironclad became the flagship of a rebellion as much as a defense network. Johnson scoured the underbelly of space markets, unearthing dubious financial trails that hinted at the megacorp's reach. He beamed the evidence along the ironclad network, fueling righteous anger and an urgent need for self-sufficiency. Mech workshops on 100 asteroids began churning out parts, jury-rigged with the desperate innovation born of necessity. The corporation threw obstacles in their path, but the network responded organically, shifting, twisting like a defiant vine. A battered transport ship became a mobile parts supplier, popping up at clandestine coordinates. A mechanic who'd been threatened into keeping quiet leaked critical data at an immense personal risk. The Zylon War had been a brutal shock, and this was a slow burn of defiance, the realization that the enemy could wear a familiar face. The corporation struck back. A mining colony, loyal to the ironclad ideal, was hit with a fabricated legal claim, their meager defenses no match for corporate-funded mercenaries. The message was clear. Protection came at a cost, and the alternative was ruin. Marcus received the desperate comm signal while overseeing a retrofit on the ironclad. "Cap, it's bad." Johnson's voice was strained, a broken edge to his usual bravado. "They're hitting Homestead 4. It's a slaughter." Marcus didn't hesitate, didn't wait for the fleet authorization that would never come. "Prep the ship for launch. We're going to war." News of the megacorp's strike against Homestead 4 sparked outrage across the ironclad network. Miners, mechanics, prospectors, all those megacorps would dismiss as expendable cogs found their voices in a collective roar of defiance. The echoes of the Zylon Wars might have faded for those in the power centers of human space, but here, on the fringes, they still stung. Marcus felt it the strongest, that burning need to act, that restless echo of the past. The corporation had crossed a line, and the old rules no longer applied. The ironclads weren't built for covert warfare, but desperate times called for desperate measures. Johnson, always his right hand, narrowed his eyes and laid out a scavenge datapad. "I found their fuel chain, outposts spread thin, vulnerable. If we hit 'em hard, hit 'em fast..." He trailed off, the same grim excitement sparking in his eyes as it did back on the asteroid belt facing down the Zylon slavers. It was a gamble, a massive one. They were pitting jury-rigged mechs and a beat-up hauler against a corporate giant with its hand on the levers of power. But Marcus had learned something in the face of the Zylon horror. Passivity was complicity. It was time to move from defense to a different kind of war, one where the shadows were their stage, where their rust and scars weren't weaknesses, but tools of retribution. The attacks were swift, surgical strikes on fuel depots, supply shipments, and remote communication hubs. The megacorp reeled, its meticulously planned expansion plans thrown into chaos. There was no glory in these hits, no open battle to mark their triumphs. Instead, it was a gnawing terror, the knowledge that the darkness held echoes of those who refused to bend, those who remembered, those who would trade everything they had for the right to fight back. Panic spread through the corporation. Simmons was summoned to board meetings, his polished veneer cracking to reveal the desperation beneath. The ironclads were a specter, a symbol of something the corporation thought it had crushed under the weight of bureaucracy and backroom deals, the defiant human spirit. Marcus pushed, knowing momentum was a fragile thing. He gambled on the corporation's fear overreacting. They tightened security, clamped control, and with those measures made enemies of those on the fringes who'd once kept their heads down. Rumors turned to resistance, whispered plans of sabotage and defiance. Then came the final piece. Johnson, after weeks with signal scramblers and buried code, held up a cracked datapad. His tired grin was a predator's. Found it. Bank transfers, illegal funds, enough to rip their respectable facade right off. The megacorp teetered. Marcus didn't wait. Transmitting the data far and wide, news feeds, pirate signals, backwater comms, the evidence of corruption and exploitation ignited a firestorm. The corporation, built on control of information, choked on its own lies. Victory wasn't a battlefield celebration, but the quiet hum of the ironclad as it returned to its old routes. There would always be those seeking to seize power, but they now knew that resistance wasn't just a memory in the history books, but a torch passed among the stars, that echoes of the past would not just be warnings, but the foundation for a future stubbornly carved out by those who dared to fight back again and again. The aftermath brought strange changes. Marcus was still a scrapper, still at the helm of the ironclad, but his crew walked a little taller, the grease on their hands now a badge of defiance. Offers of support trickled in, supplies, salvage tech, whispered offers from former fleet veterans who'd heard the rumors of the little war waged against the megacorp. It was a victory, but, like all victories, bittersweet. The corporation retreated, wounded but not out of the picture. Simmons disappeared from public view, but the chilling certainty remained. They'd simply become a more cunning predator, lurking in the shadows. It put a different kind of pressure on the ironclads, not just the need for resources, but the weight of responsibility towards the people who now looked to them for protection. One evening, as the ironclad limped into port for repairs after a long patrol, Johnson dragged Marcus to a bar with peeling neon and the sting of cheap liquor in the air. "We're becoming legends, Cap," he mumbled into a grimy glass. "It ain't just about mechs anymore, is it?" Marcus watched the mix of spacers, miners, and the hard-eyed folks who thrived on the fringe. Some looked at him with a flicker of recognition, a subtle shift that might be respect or wariness. He wasn't just Captain Drake of a salvage crew now. He represented something larger, more unruly. "Someone's got to step into the vacuum," Marcus said quietly. "Fleet's too far, the corps only care about profit." His knuckles whitened around the glass. "The question is, what do we step in with?" The answer didn't come easily. Meetings and dusty workshops replaced firefights. Haggling over resource distribution filled the hours long into the night. The ironclad network was more than a scrappy band of warriors. It was becoming a lifeline for the people scattered on the edge of civilization. The proof that they weren't abandoned, weren't mere profit margins for corporations or collateral for the fleet. They established supply routes, trading favors and stockpiled materials with the outposts too small or remote to warrant official attention. Mech workshops were expanded, turning out not just ironclad models, but basic defense units that miners could operate while in their homes. Information became their most powerful weapon, a web of scavenged comm systems, repurposed SAT relays, allowing word of threats, whether they were pirates, Zylon remnants, or corporate raiders, to spread far more quickly than any official channels ever could. Marcus, accustomed to the solitude of the void, became a reluctant negotiator, a weary voice echoing through backwater comms and crackling feeds to strike deals, demand protection from the powers that be, and push for recognition of the fringe as something more than a resource to be exploited. There was a grim humor in it all, a holler captain facing down forces far more powerful and subtle than the Zylons had ever been. Was it a perfect solution? Not even close. Was it a start? Absolutely. because amidst the stars, the jury-rigged tech, and the constant echo of past wars, hope flickered, a stubborn, defiant hope built on the realization that humanity's greatest strength wasn't any technological marvel or grand empire, but the simple, enduring act of standing their ground. Years turned into a blurry grind of supply runs, mech repairs, and tense standoff with corporate private security, and Zylon remnants that grew bolder the further they strayed from fleet protection. The ironclad network stretched thin. For every recruit eager to stand against the encroaching shadows, there were those exhausted, ground down by the endless struggle. The specter of the megacorp loomed heavily, a quiet war of embargoes and smear campaigns targeting anyone daring to align with the ironclads. It choked their supply lines, isolated them, and stoked fear among the scattered outposts that desperately needed them. One freezing night, docked at a desolate mining station near an asteroid field notorious for Zylon activity, a shadow fell over Marcus. It wasn't the sleek form of a corporate agent or the ragged silhouette of a desperate scavenger. It was a young woman, one of the latest mech pilot recruits, her expression fierce under the harsh station lights. "It's not working," she spat, voice strained from fatigue and anger. "We're spread too thin, fighting on all sides, and for what? So those fat cats back in the Corps can pretend we don't exist?" "We're keeping people alive," Marcus retorted, his voice tired. It was an argument that he'd had with himself too many times to count. "Alive, maybe," she scoffed. "Barely. Is this all we can hope for? Patching up wrecks and waiting for the next monster to come from the darkness?" She gestured to the pockmarked hulls of ironclad mechs undergoing desperate repairs. "We're fighting with scraps, Cap. How long until it's not enough?" Marcus had no answer, not one that wouldn't sound hollow even to himself. Doubt gnawed at his resolve, the relentless grind echoing the slow attrition the megacorp had forced upon them. Perhaps they had reached a breaking point. Perhaps their defiance wasn't enough against the cold indifference of a galaxy that prized power and profit above all else. Word came in fits and starts, whispered rumors born of haggard traders, stories of new corporate ventures along the outer rim, a tightening grip on resources that meant death warrants for those who resisted. And, most chillingly, whispers of a vast clandestine project funded by the megacorp, drawing upon forgotten tech and fueled by motives that danced on the edge of the horrifyingly familiar. The echoes grew louder, not of Zylon slave raids, but of the whispers that had echoed through human history whenever ambition outstripped humanity, of secret labs, of experiments in the name of progress or control. He'd seen the ghosts of the Zylon slave ships. Now, new terrifying shapes began to dance on the edge of his nightmares. The breaking point came not with a bang, but with a whimper. An isolated outpost fell silent. No distress calls, no sign of attack, just an eerie, chilling void where once a vibrant mining colony had scraped out a living. The ironclad, with a skeleton crew hastily pulled from other patrols, arrived to a scene not of battle, but of something far more sinister. Empty streets, abandoned homes, the settlement a lifeless husk. It was then, amidst the desolate silence of a place stripped of its people, that Marcus knew they were facing an insidious enemy, one that could not be fought with mechs and blasters alone. A shadow moved at the edge of the abandoned outpost, a flicker on the edge of Marcus's vision that made his skin crawl. Not Zylon, not some pirate crew, something else, the sense of wrongness achingly familiar. "Johnson," he hissed into the comm, his voice low. "Eyes sharp, something's here." Johnson's response was a soft curse. "Picking up anomalies, readings that don't make sense. It's like," he fumbled for words, "like the shipyards back in the nebula, when it felt like space itself was shifting." Ghostly images superimposed themselves on the empty settlement, the slave pods, the twisted wreckage of Zylon vessels that had warped into horrific new shapes. The past bled into the present, fueling a desperate, cornered determination. "Get the others prepped," Marcus ordered, the grim set of his jaw mirroring the chilling resolve on the faces of his veteran crew. "This isn't cleanup. It's a hunt." It was no ordinary foe they tracked. The abandoned labs told a fragmented story, half-completed machinery, power systems jury-rigged with frightening disregard for overload, and, most damningly, datapads littered with hastily deleted research logs. The outlines were chilling. genetic manipulation, cybernetic augmentation, and most insidiously, theories on targeted neural control. The megacorp wasn't content with just dominating the fringes. They aimed for the kind of control that made the Zylon slave ships seem like crude historical footnotes. It was the age-old pursuit of turning people into tools, into weapons, stripping away free will alongside flesh to achieve horrifying efficiency. They wanted an army, Johnson breathed, staring at half-finished schematics. An army without conscience. They left the outpost with cold fire burning in their veins. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about confronting the chilling truth that the worst monsters humanity faced often wore their own skin. Marcus hammered out a frantic wide-spectrum transmission to the ironclad network. There was no time for subtlety. He explained what they'd found, the ghost of the Zylons' crimes given terrifying new form. He demanded every able body, every operational mech converge on a set of coordinates, an uncharted moon where intel suggested the Megacorp's project lay hidden. It was a last, desperate throw of the dice. If they failed, the consequences were unimaginable. The response was stronger than he expected. Scarred mechs crawled from dormant workshops, fueled by a mix of terror and defiance. Miners laid down their tools and took up pilots' controls. Prospectors traded in their survey gear for jury-rigged weapons. It was a threadbare armada born of desperation, bound by the horrifying realization that there are some battles you can't afford to lose, no matter the odds. When the ironclads and their ragtag reinforcements descended on the moon, they weren't an army, not in the traditional sense. They were a swarm, a defiant roar, a testament to the fact that when pushed to the brink, when faced with the echoes of their darkest potential, humanity had only ever responded in one way, with claws bared and a furious, echoing howl of resistance. The moon base was a grotesque fusion of corporate efficiency and twisted experimentation. Gleaming corridors ran alongside laboratories where half-finished abominations twitched in restraints, their forms warped by augmentations that defied both biology and ethics. The initial surge was brutal, a testament to the raw fury burning through the ironclad ranks. Their mechs were outmatched, but every life, every precious moment they bought was a chance for sabotage, for a precious flicker of hope to ignite. Marcus and his patched-together war machine led the charge, not as a grand strategist, but as a scrapper who'd been fighting for survival his entire life. The Megacorp wasn't prepared for this reckless desperation. Their security forces, well-equipped but reliant on order, were thrown into disarray by the sheer audacity of the attack. Lab workers faced with an enemy that refused to play by the rules either scattered in terror or became hostages in the blink of an eye. It became a war waged on two fronts, the physical, a desperate fight for every inch of the sprawling base, the other a battle for information. Johnson and a team of scavenged tech experts tore into the Megacorp's network, hunting for any shred of evidence on the full scope of the experiments, desperate to expose the monstrous truth. Then came another twist, a final echo of the Zylon conflict that left Marcus reeling in the heart of the chaos. In a heavily guarded vault at the base's core, they found not a control center, but a source, dozens of stasis pods holding captured Zylons. The creatures were starved, broken, but the chilling reality was clear. The corporation wasn't just emulating the Zylons, they were weaponizing them. The fight devolved into a whirlwind of destruction. Johnson's voice, barely audible over the din, shouted in Marcus's ear. "We got it! The schematics, the funding trails, it's all here! Enough to bury those corporate bastards!" And then, "Cap, they're activating something that... the Zylons... something's happening to them." Marcus didn't need clarification. The air crackled with a sickening energy. The lights flickered with a wrongness that echoed the nebulous storm, his skin prickling. From the stasis pods, the Zylons began to twitch, their bodies contorting. The pods weren't life support, they were modification chambers. He had seconds, a sliver of time before the corporation unleashed a nightmare they themselves wouldn't fully understand. "Johnson, get that data out!" he barked, slamming a fist into the control panel. Emergency vents hissed open, spewing acrid gas into the sealed chamber. "Now!" There were screams, not just from those in the room. The transmission flooded with cries of alarm and protest from the ironclad network as they realized his intention. Sacrifice, it was the cornerstone of their history, countless unsung heroes giving up everything so others could have a future. Marcus felt the weight of those sacrifices crush down on him. "Fall back," he roared, the order raw. "Fall back and transmit, damn it! Make them pay!" The moon base imploded in a flare of toxic fumes and uncontrolled energy surges. The Megacorp's horrifying project, its attempt to seize tyrannical control, was reduced to ash and twisted metal. When the shockwave hit the ironclad, Marcus barely felt the impact. He knew the moment the view screen went dark that he wouldn't see the results of their desperate stand. But the ghosts in his head, the echoes of the enslaved, the whispers of the sacrificed, the defiant roar of those who had come before, they grew silent. Marcus Drake, salvage captain turned legend, burned himself out like a flare, a blinding final act of resistance, ensuring that the monstrous echoes of the past would not shape the future. The detonation on the moon was a cataclysm that tore through space, but its aftershocks rippled further than anyone could have predicted. The data package Johnson had beamed out spread like wildfire. The Megacorp's monstrous secret, their monstrous ambitions for control, was laid bare. Outrage ignited across the fringe, then spread to the core worlds, where even the most complacent could no longer ignore the creeping corporate overreach. The Megacorp teetered and fell with shocking speed. Board members were arrested, assets seized, and those with power and foreknowledge scattered to the winds to invade justice. It was a victory, but a costly one. Marcus and the crew of the ironclad were listed as missing, presumed dead, the echoes of their sacrifice carried in 1,000 whispered stories. Yet their defiance had lit a spark too bright to be extinguished. The ironclad network didn't dissolve, it evolved. Leadership shifted, survivors rising from the ranks to fill the void left by those who had given their all. Miners who had hastily become mech pilots settled into their new roles, battle-hardened, jaded, but more determined than ever. Johnson, his jovial spirit forever marred by loss, retreated to the shadows. With a network of scavenged tech and a haunted glint in his eyes, he became the galaxy's most relentless watchdog. He hunted down remnants of the Megacorp, whispered warnings about the dangers of complacency, and leaked any hint of corporate overreach or hidden projects. He was a grim specter, a constant reminder that some sacrifices can never be repaid, only honored. The fleet, slow to stir from its comfortable orbit over the core worlds, found itself pushed by a wave of unrest from the forgotten fringe. Supply lines improved, regulations changed, and outposts received a modicum of overdue attention. It wasn't perfect, wasn't the utopia that Marcus and so many others shed their blood for, but it was more. A new generation grew up in the shadow of the ironclads. They heard tales of a scrappy hauler turned warship, of a crew who had traded their lives to ensure their freedom. The stories were embellished, as stories always are, but the core truth remained. Against impossible odds, against enemies that threatened their very essence, they had fought. They had refused to be consumed by the shadows. A century after the moon base imploded, a relic was discovered in a remote asteroid belt. It was the ironclad, somehow intact, adrift like a ghost ship. It was salvaged, not for its scrap value, but as a testament to those who had come before. They built a museum on a mining colony that had once been on the brink of collapse due to corporate greed. The ironclad became the heart of it, not gleaming, not pristine, but a battered, scarred testament to the past. Students on class trips were shown the hastily welded patches, the dents from missile strikes, the faded stenciled symbols of all the outposts they had fought so desperately to protect. The museum wasn't just a monument, it was a beating heart that pulsed with a defiant spirit. In its echoing, metal-lined halls, a new generation of mechanics tinkered and built, not just mechs for defense, but innovations meant to improve life in the forgotten corners of space. In the flickering displays, children traced battle lines and read the names of the lost, learning not just of their grim duty, but the choices that would define their own futures. The galaxy was vast, and the darkness was always threatened to encroach. Humanity was flawed, the echoes of old evils a constant whisper beneath the progress. But in that museum, on a world that shouldn't exist by any corporate profit margin, a simple truth was hammered into every young heart. Complacency kills. Creation endures, and when all seemed lost, there would always be those who dared to light a furious fire against the night.